The impossible healing. The battle was over. Smoke rose from the shattered ground, and the air smelled of burned metal and blood. Liara, a young Zilari scientist, stood frozen, her large violet eyes locked on the impossible sight before her. She had seen many wounds in her time, but nothing like this. Ethan, the human soldier, stood in the center of the battlefield, his uniform torn, a deep gash across his chest. Zilari warriors healed slowly. It took weeks for even a small wound to close. But Ethan, he just looked down at his injury, sighed, and within seconds, the wound sealed itself. Liara's breath caught in her throat. This couldn't be real. The other Zilari warriors around her stared, their greenish skin turning pale with fear. Some took a step back. Others whispered among themselves, "This is unnatural. This is not possible." Ethan wiped the blood from his skin, stretching his arms like nothing had happened. He glanced around at the terrified faces. "What?" he asked, his voice calm. "Did I do something wrong?" Liara opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She felt lightheaded, her vision blurred. Then, darkness took over, and she collapsed. She fainted. Ethan blinked as the alien girl dropped to the ground. Whoa, he said, rushing forward. He barely managed to catch her before she hit the dirt. Her soft, blue skin felt cold. Her breathing was uneven. "Hey, you okay?" The other Zilari didn't move to help her. Instead, they pointed their weapons at him. "You?" one of the warriors hissed. "What are you?" Ethan frowned, still holding Liara. "I just healed. No big deal." "No big deal." Another Zilari took a step forward, his hands shaking. "You should be dead. That injury, you should be in pain. You should be." Ethan sighed. He hated explaining this. "Look, humans have nanites in their blood. Tiny machines that repair damage. It's just medical tech. It's normal for us." Normal. The warriors looked at each other in disbelief. To the Zilari, healing was a slow, painful process. Their people had advanced in technology, but their biology was fragile. A deep wound like Ethan's should have left him bedridden for months. But he healed in seconds. It terrified them. The decision. Liara groaned, her eyes fluttering open. She felt strong hands holding her up. Confused, she looked up and saw Ethan staring down at her. "You good?" he asked. She gasped and pushed away from him, scrambling backward. Her heart pounded in her chest. "This isn't possible," she whispered. You healed too fast." Ethan scratched his head. Yeah, humans do that." Liara stared at him like he was a monster. Her people had studied humans before, but they had never heard of this. If all humans could heal like this. They were more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Before she could say another word, a deep, booming voice echoed across the battlefield. "Seize him." Liara turned in shock. The Zilari High Commander had arrived. His long cloak billowed in the wind as he stepped forward, eyes narrowed. The warriors obeyed instantly. Within seconds, Ethan was surrounded. "Whoa, hold on." Ethan raised his hands as the Zilari aimed their weapons at him. "This feels unnecessary." The commander stepped closer, his expression dark and cold. "No creature should heal like this. This is not natural. This is a threat." Liara's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen her people react this way. "But he fought with us," she argued. "He saved many of our soldiers." The commander ignored her. His gaze was locked on Ethan. If one human can do this, what are the rest of them capable of? Ethan's jaw tightened. He had seen this look before. Fear. The kind of fear that turned friends into enemies. "This is a mistake," Ethan said firmly. "I'm not your enemy." The commander didn't answer. Instead, he gave a sharp nod. The warriors lunged. Ethan dodged the first attack, grabbing the nearest weapon and twisting it out of the warrior's hands. He moved fast, too fast for them. But there were too many of them. Within seconds, a stun blast hit his side. His body tensed, his muscles locking up as he crashed to the ground. Liara's heart pounded. As the soldiers dragged Ethan away, she stood there, frozen, watching the only human she had ever trusted disappear into captivity. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if her people were doing the right thing. The human secret. Ethan sat in the cold, dimly lit holding chamber, his wrists bound with glowing blue restraints. He had been in worse situations before. Black ops missions, war zones, back alley fights. But this was new. Captured by aliens. He sighed and leaned back against the metal wall. His body had already healed from the stun blast, though he still felt a dull ache in his limbs. Not from pain, but from exhaustion. His nanites worked fast, but they drained energy. He could feel the strain creeping up on him. A hissing sound came from the door. Ethan turned his head as it slid open, revealing the last person he expected to see. Liara. She hesitated at the entrance, her large violet eyes filled with uncertainty. Her blue skin looked paler than before, like she hadn't slept. She held a small data tablet in her trembling hands. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "So are you here to interrogate me, or do I get a last meal first?" Liara didn't answer. She stepped inside, glancing at the guards outside before the door sealed shut behind her. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she spoke. "You're healing again," she said quietly, watching his skin where the restraints had rubbed against his wrists. The redness was already fading. Ethan shrugged. "Yeah, that's kinda my thing." Her grip tightened on the tablet. "This is not normal. To you, maybe." Liara took a shaky breath and stepped closer, sitting on the small bench across from him. Her hands hovered over the tablet, and after a moment, she activated a hologram. Lines of alien biological data floated in the air. His biological data. Scans of his tissue, cellular breakdowns, and a strange set of readings Liara seemed particularly focused on. "You have machines inside your blood," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Nanites," Ethan corrected. "Little repair bots. Humanity figured them out a while ago. They fix damage before it gets serious." Liara shook her head, her expression unreadable. "But how? Your species. You are not an old race. You have only just started to explore the stars. How did you create such technology?" Ethan smirked. "We break a lot of stuff, so we had to get good at fixing ourselves." Liara didn't laugh. "You don't understand," she said, voice urgent now. "Even the oldest species in the galaxy cannot do this. Our kind has medicine, regeneration chambers, healing accelerators. But not this. Your body does not just heal fast. It heals perfectly. No scars. No weakness. This is unnatural." Ethan's amusement faded. He leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze. "Where I come from, it's just medicine," he said. "You break a bone, it gets fixed. You get a disease, nanites wipe it out. We still died, just not as easily." Liara exhaled slowly, her fingers tapping nervously on the tablet. "And you think this is normal?" "Yeah." She shook her head again, as if she couldn't process his words. No, this is not normal. It is dangerous." Ethan frowned. "Dangerous?" Liara hesitated. Then she turned the tablet around, letting him see the data. "The High Council believes you are a threat. If one human can do this, what happens when your species spreads across the stars?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Wait, you think we're too hard to kill?" Liara didn't answer. That was enough of an answer. Ethan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, that's just great. You know, I didn't ask to get kidnapped and thrown in a cell. I fought alongside your people. I saved lives. And now you're treating me like some kind of monster." Liara flinched at the word monster. For the first time, she wasn't sure he was wrong. The coming storm. Before Lyra could respond, an alarm blared through the facility. The walls vibrated with the force of distant explosions. Ethan and Lyra both tensed. "That's not good," Ethan muttered. The door slammed open, and a Zelari guard rushed in, his breathing heavy. His uniform was torn, his face pale. "High Scholar Lyra," he gasped. "We are under attack." Lyra shot to her feet. "Attack? Who?" The guard barely got the words out before a deafening explosion rocked the station, making the walls tremble. A deep, growling voice echoed through the comm system. "Surrender the human, or we take him by force." Lyra's blood ran cold. "The Ralzek." Ethan's expression darkened. "Great. More aliens who want to kill me." I was starting to feel left out. The guard turned to Lyra. "The Council says the human must not fall into enemy hands. We are evacuating him to the research labs." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Wait. Research labs." He looked at Lyra. "What does that mean?" She hesitated. Then, quietly, she answered, "They want to study you." Ethan froze. "You mean, cut me open and see how I work?" Lyra didn't answer. That was answer enough. For a long moment, Ethan just stared at her. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and sharp. "You need to make a choice," he said, standing up. "You know I saved your people. You know I'm not the monster here. So what's it gonna be, Lyra?" The walls shook again, and the sound of alien warships filled the sky. The Ralzek were coming, and Lyra had only moments to decide. Escape and betrayal. The war sirens screamed through the facility, their shrill sound bouncing off the cold steel walls. The Ralzek were here. Lyra's heart pounded as she stared at Ethan. The human stood tall despite the chaos, his hazel eyes locked onto hers, waiting for an answer. The walls trembled from the distant explosions, and outside the reinforced windows, dark warships blotted out the sky. She had spent years studying alien species, learning their strengths, weaknesses, but nothing had prepared her for this, a human who could heal like a god. And now, two powerful factions were fighting to control him. The Zelari wanted to study him. The Ralzek wanted to capture him. And Ethan, he just wanted to survive. Lyra felt something sharp twist in her chest. The Council had ordered her to assist in Ethan's transport to the research labs, where he would be dissected, analyzed, and never see freedom again. But deep inside, she knew the truth. He didn't deserve this. Her fingers clenched into a fist. She had to make a choice, and she had to make it now. The great escape begins. The Zelari guards moved fast, two of them stepping forward to grab Ethan. He tensed, muscles coiling, but Lyra acted first. "Wait," she shouted, raising a hand. The soldiers stopped. "We cannot move him through the research sector. It's exposed," she lied, forcing her voice to stay steady. "The Ralzek will track his signal. We must take him through the underground tunnels instead." The guards hesitated. They looked at each other, uncertain. Ethan, to his credit, played along. He gave her a blank stare, as if he were confused, waiting for orders like a good little prisoner. One of the guards frowned. "High Scholar, are you certain?" Lyra nodded sharply. "I would not risk this otherwise." The guard hesitated for another moment, then nodded. "Understood. We will prepare the alternate route." As they turned away to relay the message, Lyra took a small, careful step toward Ethan. "Trust me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the alarms. Ethan glanced at her, then grinned. "Oh, this is gonna be fun." The betrayal. The plan worked. For now, Lyra led Ethan through the lower corridors of the facility, pretending to follow standard protocol. The guards followed closely, their weapons ready, completely unaware that they were walking straight into a trap. Her trap. Ethan walked beside her, hands still bound, but his body language was relaxed. Too relaxed. She could tell he was just waiting for the right moment. The moment came 5 minutes later. The corridor was long and narrow, lit only by faint blue emergency lights. The perfect place for a distraction. Liara turned suddenly, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Now," she hissed. Ethan exploded into action. With inhuman speed, he spun on the closest guard, slamming his elbow into the soldier's ribs. The Zilari gasped, his weapon slipping from his hands. Ethan caught it before it hit the floor. The second guard shouted in alarm, raising his plasma rifle. Too slow. Ethan ducked, ramming his shoulder into the soldier's stomach. The guard crashed against the wall with a grunt. Liara reached into her sleeve, pulling out a small shock device. She pressed it against the third guard's armor, sending a pulse of blue energy through his body. The soldier stiffened, then collapsed. Silence. Liara's breath came fast, her hands shaking. She had just betrayed her own people. She turned to Ethan, who had already freed himself from the restraints. He rolled his shoulders, stretching. "I was starting to wonder if you'd actually do it," he admitted. She swallowed. "I don't know if I made the right choice." Ethan grinned. "Oh, you did." Then the alarms changed. A new voice echoed through the speakers, one filled with cold authority. "Attention. Security breach detected. The prisoner has escaped. He is armed and dangerous. All forces. Terminate on sight." Liara's blood ran cold. They weren't going to take Ethan alive anymore. They were going to kill him. And by helping him, she had just made herself a target too. The hunt begins. There was no time to think. No time to regret. Footsteps echoed down the halls. Soldiers were coming. "Move." Ethan grabbed her wrist and pulled her forward. They sprinted down the corridors, weaving through the complex as shouts and weapons fire rang out behind them. Ethan moved like a shadow, dodging blasts, his inhuman reflexes keeping them one step ahead. Liara struggled to keep up. Her species were thinkers, not fighters. Her breath burned in her lungs, but she pushed forward. Ethan suddenly skidded to a halt. Liara nearly crashed into him. Ahead of them, a massive reinforced door sealed the exit. A squad of heavily armed Zilari soldiers stood in front of it, their weapons already raised. "End of the road. Human," their commander said, voice filled with cold certainty. "Surrender now, and I will make this painless." Liara's heart pounded. There was no way out. Ethan glanced at her. Then, without warning, he grinned. "Okay," he said, dropping his stolen weapon. Liara's eyes widened. "Ethan, what are you?" Before she could finish, Ethan lunged forward with impossible speed. The guards fired, but they were too late. Ethan was already inside their defenses. His fist cracked into the first soldier's helmet, sending him crashing into the wall. Another raised his rifle, but Ethan grabbed it, twisted it clean out of the soldier's hands, and swung the butt into his jaw. Liara watched in shock. He was fast, too fast. The last soldier hesitated, then turned his weapon toward her. Liara's stomach dropped. She barely had time to react before. A blur of movement. Ethan was suddenly in front of her, his hand catching the plasma bolt midair. The nanites in his bloodstream reacted instantly, healing the burned skin before it could even fully form. The soldier froze. His eyes went wide with pure terror. Ethan just smiled. "Yeah," he said, cracking his knuckles. "You guys are screwed. The war for one human." The battlefield was chaos. Sirens screamed across the facility as explosions rocked the ground, shaking the walls like an earthquake. Fires raged in the distance, smoke rising into the alien sky. The Ralzek warships loomed overhead, dark and menacing, their cannons tearing through the Zilari defenses like paper. And in the middle of it all, one human stood against two armies. Ethan exhaled, rolling his shoulders. His uniform was torn, his skin still burned from the last plasma shot. But the wound was already closing, the nanites surging through his body like an unstoppable tide. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "This is getting ridiculous." Beside him, Lara clutched her plasma pistol, her blue skin pale with fear. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't built for this. But she had made her choice. She had betrayed her people to save him. Now they were both trapped between two merciless forces, the Zilari, who wanted to study him, and the Ralzek, who wanted to own him. Neither of them was an option. "We need to move," Ethan said, grabbing her wrist. Now. Liara barely had time to react before he pulled her forward, sprinting through the war-torn corridors. Plasma fire rained down around them, scorching the ground where they had just been standing. "We won't make it to the ships," she gasped. "The Ralzek will. Not if I take their ship first." Liara's eyes widened. "That's suicide." Ethan grinned. "Yeah, probably. But hey, might as well give 'em a reason to fear me." The human problem. Above them, the Zilari High Command watched in horror. The generals stood around a massive holographic display, watching live footage of the battlefield. Every camera feed told the same impossible story. The human would not die. Commander Rylos slammed a fist against the table. "This is not a warrior," he growled. "This is a biological weapon." The other leaders murmured among themselves. They had always feared humanity's potential. This was beyond their worst expectations. One of the scientists turned to him, her expression pale. "Sir, if humans can heal this fast, if they can fight through injuries that would kill even our strongest warriors, then we are no longer dealing with an ally." Rylos nodded grimly. "We are dealing with the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The Ralzek's plan." Meanwhile, aboard the Ralzek mothership, General Kor watched Ethan's rampage with gleaming red eyes. The human was faster than expected. Stronger. The perfect specimen. "He is a weapon," Kor rumbled. "And I will have him." His second in command, a towering warrior with jet-black armor, stepped forward. "Shall I order his capture?" Kor bared his fangs in amusement. "Capture?" He let out a deep chuckle. "No, Commander. We will let him come to us." The officer hesitated. "Come to us?" Kor gestured to the fleet of warships surrounding the planet. "The human is strong, but he is still human. He needs to breathe. He needs to eat. His nanites may heal him, but they will drain his energy." His grin widened. "We will exhaust him. Then, when his body fails, we will take him." The impossible battle. Back on the ground, Ethan and Liara burst into the open battlefield. They had reached the landing zone, where dozens of ships, both Zilari and Ralzek, were locked in a deadly aerial dogfight. Liara gasped at the sight of it. "We're not getting through that." Ethan scanned the ships quickly. The Ralzek transport vessel was closest. It was heavily armed, but that meant one thing. "It's got shields," he said. "If we take that, we can punch through the blockade." Liara stared at him. "You can't just take a warship." Ethan grinned. "Watch me." Before she could argue, he was already moving. Explosions tore through the ground as he sprinted forward, dodging enemy fire like he could see it coming before it happened. Plasma bolts whizzed past his head, but he didn't slow down. A Ralzek warrior, twice his size, covered in obsidian armor, charged at him, wielding a massive energy blade. Ethan didn't stop. The Ralzek swung. Ethan ducked, grabbed the alien's wrist, and with a single brutal motion, snapped the bone. The warrior roared in agony, dropping his weapon. Ethan caught it midair and threw it like a spear. The blade buried itself into another enemy's chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Liara watched in stunned silence. He wasn't just healing fast. He was learning fast. The final push. They'd reached the ship's entrance. A squad of Ralzek soldiers stood between them and the hatch. Ethan cracked his knuckles. "Liara, get to the controls. I'll handle this." Liara hesitated. "You can't fight them all alone." Ethan just smiled. "I don't need to win. I just need to survive." Then he charged. The Ralzek opened fire. Ethan dodged every shot. He moved like a ghost, weaving through their ranks, tearing through them with inhuman precision. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a force of nature. Liara didn't waste time. She rushed inside the ship, her hands shaking as she activated the controls. The ship roared to life, engines burning hot. "Ethan, get in." Ethan spun midair, kicked an enemy into the wall, and sprinted toward the hatch. As he leaped inside, Liara slammed the doors shut. The ship lifted off, engines screaming. Outside, the Zilari and Rulzek forces watched in shock as the stolen warship punched through the blockade, disappearing into the stars. Ethan leaned against the control panel, breathing hard. His body ached, the nanites struggling to keep up. Liara sat across from him, still trembling. "You're insane," she whispered. Ethan grinned. "Yeah, but I'm still alive." She let out a shaky breath, then looked out the window. The galaxy had just changed forever, and it was all because of one human. Human willpower. The stolen Rulzek warship tore through the stars at breakneck speed, its engines burning white-hot. Inside the cockpit, Liara's fingers danced across the control panel, her breaths shallow and quick. They had escaped the battlefield, but the hard part wasn't over. Behind them, an entire fleet was giving chase. Ethan sat slumped against the co-pilot's seat, his uniform burned and torn, his skin raw from countless wounds, wounds that were still healing before Liara's eyes. She had seen him fight. She had seen him take blows that would have killed anyone else. But now, for the first time, Ethan looked exhausted. His nanites were slowing down. Liara's throat tightened. She had studied human resilience, heard the stories of their absurd adaptability, but she had never witnessed it like this. "Hey," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Ethan opened one eye, giving her a tired grin. "Hate yourself. You don't look so good." Ethan chuckled. "That bad, huh?" She swallowed. "I don't think your healing is working as fast as before." Ethan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I figured that out when I started feeling pain again." That terrified her. The Ethan she met was untouchable, a walking miracle of biology and technology. But now, as she watched his hands tremble slightly, she realized something. Even with his nanites, even with his impossible strength, he was still human. And humans could break. The trap. Before she could respond, a warning alarm blared through the ship. Liara whipped her head toward the radar screen. Her blood turned to ice. They boxed us in. A massive Zilari battlecruiser had appeared in their path, cutting off their escape route. Behind them, the Rulzek fleet loomed, weapons armed and ready. They had nowhere to go. Ethan sat up, blinking. "Huh, that's not good." Liara's hands clenched into fists. "We can't outrun them. We can't fight them. They're going to." The communication system crackled to life. A cold, familiar voice filled the ship. Human. Liara stiffened. She knew that voice. Zilari High Commander Rylos, the one who ordered Ethan's capture. "You have proven your strength," Rylos continued, his voice like steel. "But your existence is a danger to the balance of the galaxy. You must surrender." Ethan leaned forward, flipping on the ship's transmitter. His voice came out calm, steady, unbothered. "Yeah, see, I don't really like that plan," he said. "Not a fan of being someone's lab rat." Rylos didn't respond at first. Then, slowly, he spoke again. "You do not understand, human. The Rulzek do not want to kill you. They'd want to control you." Liara's breath caught in her throat. Ethan went still. "If you refuse to surrender," Rylos continued, "we will be forced to eliminate you before they can take you." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You mean you'll kill me yourself?" "Yes." Silence. Then, the Rulzek General Corps' deep, rumbling voice joined the call. "The human belongs to us," Corps growled. "We will take him alive. Your fleet is weak. You cannot stop us." Liara felt sick. She knew what Corps meant. The Rulzek didn't just want Ethan as a prisoner. They wanted him as a weapon. Ethan let out a breath, looking at the two fleets that had gathered outside. His hands curled into fists. Liara could see it. He was calculating, thinking, pushing past the exhaustion. And then, he smiled. A slow, almost amused grin. "All right," Ethan said. "You all want to see what a human is really capable of." He cracked his knuckles, ignoring the protests of his own body. "Let's see who breaks first." The last stand. Liara barely had time to process what was happening before Ethan moved. He grabbed the ship's controls, flipping a dozen switches before she could even react. "What are you?" "Taking the fight to them," Ethan said. Before she could argue, the ship lurched forward, directly toward the battlecruiser. Liara screamed, "What are you doing?" "Something really stupid." The Rulzek opened fire. The Zilari opened fire. The entire battlefield became a storm of chaos. But Ethan didn't stop. He pushed the ship to its limits, weaving through enemy fire, dodging plasma cannons with inhuman reflexes. Liara's fingers dug into her seat. "This is insane." Ethan laughed. "Welcome to humanity. When a human refuses to fall, they should have died. They should have been obliterated." But Ethan's mind worked faster than any AI. His reflexes, heightened by adrenaline and raw human instinct, were sharper than anything the aliens had ever seen. He used the Zilari's own attacks against the Rulzek, maneuvered between both fleets, turning their fire into friendly fire. Liara watched in awe and horror. He wasn't just fighting back. He was outsmarting two entire armies at once. And they couldn't stop him. The breaking point. Then, the inevitable happened. A warning alert blared. Ethan's body had reached its limit. His vision blurred. His hands trembled. His chest ached. The nanites were failing. Liara saw it happen. "Ethan," she shouted, "you're healing." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Not yet," he muttered. "I'm not done yet." He forced his body forward, forcing his mind to stay sharp. The will of a human refusing to die. Liara had studied hundreds of species. None of them, had the willpower of a human. They should have lost. But Ethan refused. And that changed everything. The turning point. The Rulzek fleet faltered first. General Kor, watching the impossible battle unfold, felt something he had never felt before. Fear. "We are losing." The words tasted bitter in his mouth. They had thrown everything at the human. And still, he fought. "We must retreat," one of his officers whispered. Kor clenched his fists. Then, slowly, he turned to his fleet. "Fall back." The aftermath. Minutes later, the battlefield was empty. The Rulzek had retreated. The Zilari High Command was silent. And Ethan slumped back in his seat, completely drained. His body had taken too much damage. His vision swam. Liara barely caught him before he collapsed. Ethan. His breathing was slow, too slow. Liara's hands shook. For the first time, she was afraid. For the first time, Ethan looked fragile. And she realized. Even the strongest human could break. The final battle. Ethan's body was failing. The once unstoppable human, the soldier who had fought through wounds that would have killed anyone else, now lay unconscious in the co-pilot's seat, his breaths shallow and weak. His face was pale, a stark contrast to the blood staining his torn uniform. For the first time, his nanites weren't enough. Liara's heart pounded as she checked the readings. His vital signs were unstable. His body had healed too much, too fast. His cells were exhausted, his energy reserves drained. She had spent her entire life studying other species, searching for what made them unique, what made them special. And now, she understood. Humans weren't just strong. They were relentless. Ethan had fought past the limits of his biology, refusing to fall. Even now, with his body breaking down, he had won. The Rulzek had retreated. The Zilari High Command had gone silent. And yet, it wasn't over. The enemy that wouldn't quit. A sudden alarm blared through the stolen warship's control panel. Lyara's breath caught in her throat as she looked at the radar. A single massive warship was approaching, and she recognized it immediately. The Ralzek flagship. Aboard that ship, General Kor sat in his command chair, his red eyes burning with fury. "Enough games," he growled. "This human is mine." The Ralzek had been humiliated, defeated, but Kor had one last plan. He activated the ship's planet killer cannon, a weapon designed to wipe entire civilizations off the map. He wasn't going to fight Ethan anymore. He was going to destroy the planet. The choice. Lyara's fingers trembled over the controls. The planet killer cannon began charging, its energy readings spiking dangerously high. If Kor fired, the explosion would consume everything. Ethan stirred slightly, groaning in pain. His eyes barely opened, clouded with exhaustion. "Lyra." His voice was weak, hoarse. She grabbed his hand. "Ethan, stay with me," she pleaded. He let out a tired chuckle. "We win." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because they hadn't won. Not yet. Kor's warship was too powerful. Their stolen Ralzek vessel was falling apart. There was no way they could fight back. But there was one thing left. One last, impossible move. Lyara's pulse raced. She turned to Ethan, her throat tightening. "You're too weak to fight," she whispered. "But I can finish this." Ethan's hand tightened around hers. His tired eyes locked onto hers, sharp despite his exhaustion. "Leah, don't." She smiled, but it was bittersweet. "I told you," she whispered. "I'm not a warrior." Then she let go. Before Ethan could stop her, she stood and ran to the pilot's seat. She activated the ship's last remaining weapon system. The screen flickered with a warning. "Final Porotoxio. Suicide strike." It wasn't meant for combat. It was a last resort, designed for one thing only: a direct collision at hyperspeed. A one-way ticket to victory. Lyra took a shaky breath and locked the ship's trajectory. Ethan's eyes widened in horror. "Lyra, you know." She hit the controls. The engines roared to life. The ship lurched forward, accelerating straight toward the Ralzek flagship. Kor's warship fired, but it was too late. Lyara's ship tore through the enemy shields, crashing directly into the planet killer cannon. A split second of silence. Then, a blinding explosion. The end of Kor. The Ralzek flagship was ripped apart from the inside. The energy from the planet killer cannon overloaded, sending out a shockwave that tore through space. Kor had only a moment to realize what had happened before his warship disintegrated into fire. The last of the Ralzek vanished in the blast. Lyra was gone. The last human standing. Ethan felt like he was drowning in silence. The war was over. The Ralzek were defeated. But none of it mattered, because she was gone. The ship had no escape pods. She had known that before she made her choice. She had saved the galaxy. She had saved him. Ethan sat in the wrecked cockpit, his body aching, his mind numb. The Zilari High Command's transmission crackled through the speakers. "Human," Commander Rylos said. His voice was no longer cold, no longer commanding. It was quiet, uncertain. "You won." Ethan didn't answer. He just closed his eyes. The impossible return. A day passed. Then two. Ethan sat in silence, staring at the stars. And then, a distress signal. Weak, faint, coming from inside the wreckage of the Ralzek flagship. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. He activated the ship's scanners, searching desperately. And there, deep inside the debris, was a single life sign. His breath hitched. Lyra, the human threat, final. The universe had gone silent. The Ralzek fleet was gone, obliterated in the final explosion. The war was over. The Zilari watched in stunned disbelief as the human, the impossible human, stood victorious, alone in the vast emptiness of space. Ethan had won, but he didn't feel like a winner. Not yet. Not until he found her. The distress signal from the wreckage pulsed weakly on his screen. A single life sign flickered through the debris field, barely detectable. Lara. Ethan's heart pounded. His body still ached, his nanites struggling to repair the damage he had pushed them past. But he didn't care. He wasn't about to lose her. Not after everything. He slammed the controls forward, maneuvering his stolen Ralzek warship toward the wreckage of the enemy flagship. Come on, Lara. Hold on. The rescue. The wreckage was a maze of twisted metal and fire, floating in the void like a shattered beast. Ethan maneuvered carefully, weaving through the remains of the Ralzek's once mighty warship. His scanners beeped. The signal was getting stronger. She was still alive. His ship's comms crackled. A faint, broken voice whispered through the static. Ethan. His throat tightened. I'm here, Lyra. Stay awake. No response. Ethan clenched his jaw, pushing the engines to their limit. He spotted a half-collapsed escape chamber, barely holding together. Inside, a single heat signature. That was her. He didn't hesitate. He activated the ship's docking clamps, tearing the metal apart with sheer force until the chamber door was exposed. He grabbed a plasma cutter, forced the door open. And there she was. Lyra. Her blue skin was covered in cuts and burns, her breathing shallow. She looked fragile, so much smaller than he had ever seen her before. For the first time, she looked like she might break. Ethan rushed to her, pulling her into his arms. Her skin was cold, her pulse weak. Hey, he murmured, shaking her gently. You don't get to do this, all right? You don't get to leave me after pulling that stunt. She stirred slightly, her violet eyes fluttering open. A faint smile touched her lips. Told you, I'm not a warrior. Ethan let out a shaky breath, relief crashing over him. You're wrong, he whispered. You just won a war. Her fingers weakly grasped his uniform. Did we win? He pulled her closer. Yeah, we won. She exhaled, her body going limp against him. But her pulse was still there. She was alive. And that was all that mattered. The aftermath. The battle was over. The Zilari fleet surrounded the battlefield, their ships now drifting cautiously in the silent expanse. Ethan carried Lyra back onto his stolen warship, placing her gently onto the medical cot. His nanites were too drained to help her, but Zilari medicine would be enough. A transmission flickered to life. Commander Rylos' face appeared on the screen. The once arrogant Zilari leader now looked uncertain. Human, Rylos said slowly. I owe you an apology. Ethan leaned against the control panel, his expression unreadable. For what? Trying to kill me, or assuming my entire species was a threat? Rylos hesitated. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. Both. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rylos let out a breath. The Council has convened. We have decided to recognize humanity as an independent force in the galaxy. You have proven that your kind is not to be underestimated. Ethan's jaw clenched. That's a nice way of saying you're afraid of us. Rylos didn't deny it. Your ability to heal, your resilience in battle, your refusal to surrender even when death was certain. Rylos' voice was quiet now. It is unnatural to us. Even our strongest species cannot endure what you endured. If humans spread across the stars unchecked. His gaze darkened. You will change the balance of the universe forever. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. You know, I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't wake up thinking, hey, let's go start an intergalactic incident. Rylos exhaled sharply. Perhaps, but it does not change what has happened. Ethan glanced over his shoulder at Lyra, still unconscious but stable. He shook his head. I don't care about politics. I don't care about your galactic balance. I just want to keep my people safe. Rylos nodded slowly. Then let us hope your people never become our enemy." The transmission ended. Ethan stared at the blank screen for a long moment. He knew what Rylos was really saying. The galaxy was afraid of humans now, and fear leads to war. The future of humanity. Hours passed. The battlefield was cleared, the remnants of war drifting into the abyss. Ethan sat beside Lara, watching over her as she rested. He knew the truth now. This wasn't the end. The Zilari had seen what a single human could do. The Ralzek had fallen, but others would come. Other empires, other species. And they would remember this battle. They would remember him. A human who refused to die. A human who fought beyond his limits. A human who turned the tide of war alone. And when humanity finally stepped into the stars, when they spread across the galaxy like wildfire, the universe would never be the same. Ethan sighed and leaned back. His body still ached. His nanites still struggled to recover. But he smiled, because no matter what came next, humanity was ready, and nothing in the galaxy could stop them now.